the record purpose of keeping record, could you please identify yourself? We're going to start with Franklin Leonard. Just give us a brief bio of yourself. Let's just.
My name is Franklin Leonard. I am the founder of something called The Blacklist, a annual list of screenplays and a website that provides access for scriptwriters from around the world to Hollywood, and also brings a data-intensive approach to entertainment.
Great. So, what about Uncle Tunde? Please, could you please introduce yourself briefly?
No, I think you should drop the uncle here.
Tunde Kelani. Just a
No, my name is Tunde Kelani, and you can call me TK. I'm a filmmaker, and my career spans decades. You know, I've started.
I can't hear anything. No.
You can't hear me?
Yeah, the audio is gone here. But let me. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yes.
Loud and clear.
Can you hear me?
Let me check my audio.
Yeah, it's from your end, so sorry, TKO, just hold on.
That's fine.
Okay, are you on? Are you on?
Okay, I think
You're on. Okay, great.
Hold on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. TK, you can take it from there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, my name is Tunde Kelani, and I'm referred to in the industry simply as TK. I started my career more than 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago. First of all, as a photographer, and then I went into motion pictures. I was trained in television, and I've worked with every known technology of making films, from 8mm, Super 8, 16mm, Super 16, 35mm, and then in new alternative technology, video, digital video, analog video, then into digital, and then fully in digital filmmaking. And this is very exciting for me because of the technology. For instance, this Hangout,
absolutely,
3 years ago, we never have imagined that we will all be streaming across the world like this, taking part in this kind of discourse. So I'm really happy to be part of this.
Great. We're in fact rejoicing to have you on. So we're going to start off now. First of all, I'm going to start off with a question. There's a quote I just saw, and I thought it was apt. I don't know if you're going to recognize who said this quote. It says, make movies that already have an audience, and identify your audience for a specific subject or idea that you need to do. So, Franklin, you actually made that quote.
Yeah. I would revise it. I've been doing a lot of thinking about exactly that recently. And what I've realized is that I think there's an audience for every film. The question is how large that audience is and how you can get to that audience. And I think one of the remarkable things about technology, like the fact that I'm sitting right now in San Francisco and you guys are all in Nigeria, it's possible to find an audience now in a way that did not exist 1 year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And so while I do think that it's easier, certainly if you're trying to work in Hollywood, to start from a presumption of finding an audience and building from there, I think you can also tell the story that you want to and then find the audience. But just from an economic standpoint, it's important to make sure that however much you're spending on making your film, that you find an audience that can justify whatever that cost is. Yeah. Because I think there are very few filmmakers who only want to make one film and then never make another. And it's important to whoever's paying for the film to be made and I'm speaking primarily about an economic model that exists in the U.S., but you want to make sure that you're able to continue to make films, and part of doing that is making sure you can find an audience willing to pay to see them, so that you can keep making them.
Yeah.
On one hand, that's true, but the potential for audience is so much larger now than it ever was before, that I think it's important to think internationally, and it's important to think about the entire world when you think about where your audience might be and how to get to them.
Great. Because I really wanted an answer to that quote. When I saw it, I wanted to find out if you still hold that view right now, or if you've expanded your view on that.
Yeah, one of the things that's been remarkable since the last time we spoke is that I'm going through a sort of professional transition from working exclusively in Hollywood, and thinking more about the international audience and more about the potential of the digital age. And I think that it's important to have an audience if you're making a film. You're making the film ostensibly for someone that is going to be a member of that audience. But the potential for who that audience is and where they are has never been more large. And the larger it gets, and the sort of further flung it can be in the world, the more likely it is that you'll be able to find an audience. And given that, it's more important that you find the story that you want to tell and tell it well, and you may be able to find an audience for it regardless of what it is.
Yeah, I agree.
I think the audience, my thoughts on that quote probably change on a daily basis, if I'm being totally honest, depending on how cynical I am about the Hollywood infrastructure at the moment.
I see. Great. TK, what do you think? What's your take on that?
Yes. In my own case, I didn't have to worry about finding an audience because I was participant. When you are working in indigenous language and culture, everything that happened in the community had an audience. And at one time, I was part of the audience myself because my father, my grandfather, everybody in the community told me stories. And then, of course, I discovered the Yorubas have always had the culture of theater. And there was a time when there was this movement of the traveling theater, and I was inspired a lot by these people. And they had the social responsibility of traveling throughout the whole nation, taking the theater on wheels and finding audiences all over. So there has been a generation, of audience from generation to generation. And for me, the choice was not difficult because I was part of that society and part of that community. And the traveling theater, and I could tell you that I've been influenced and inspired by the fathers. I can give you some of the representatives in Hubert Ogundi, for instance, and Kola Ogumola, and Durola Dipo, and Adelove, and people like Ake Ogungbe, and Onyade Jobi. These are the people who handed that generation of audience, to us. And it is our responsibility to use film, for instance, the cinema as a medium to continue to engage that audience. And if we consider, for instance, that there are 35 million Yorubas in the homeland and about 12 million in the diaspora or outside of the homeland, we can easily that my responsibility as a filmmaker is to continue to use the medium of cinema to engage that generation of audience until we hand them over to another generation, as represented by Kunle Afolayan, for instance.
I know. Thank you so much. Now, the next question I wanted to ask, somebody actually sent this, in, is, Franklin, your blacklist just went, I think you divided it into two categories, the paying aspect of it and the normal one. Now, question I've been asked is, the paying side and the normal one, is it for everybody that is open internationally, or to Hollywood, centric films?
So I think certainly the site exists primarily for Hollywood-centric films. The primary, I think, purpose it serves is providing access to that very closed system. The annual list is still just a survey of people working in Hollywood about films that they've loved, the screenplays that they've loved in the previous year. And then the new site is designed to be a real-time version of that and take advantage of the fact that the industry is already using that site as a way to provide access. But ultimately, the industry members that are using that site are using it to find material that they can make in the Hollywood system. And so as a consequence, I think it is primarily, the focus is certainly Hollywood-centric films. But I think the definition of what a Hollywood-centric film is expanding day to day, really, again, as we see an evolution of the audience, as Tunde said.
So, frankly, my next question is there any chance that you're going to shift a bit from Hollywood-centric film to films with African, content?
Well, I think that there's two things. There's sort of two questions there. I think the first is, will there be an appetite in Hollywood for African-centric film? And I think certainly as as Hollywood's ability to make money on the African audience grows, there just necessarily will be, because it's very much a capitalist system.
I know.
And the second is will we as an organization evolve to accommodate and to focus on different content? And I think both answers are yes, to some extent. One of the reasons I'm actually here in San Francisco and have been for the last couple of days is to begin some of that thinking about how the site can think more internationally and think about content that's not exclusively feature film that's designed to be released in a theater. I think one of the really exciting things about digital and one of the really exciting things about mobile is that you're not limited to, a sort of 2-hour film that requires a $20 million budget or above. I'll be honest and admit that I have not yet figured out how to adapt what we're doing to that space, but it's definitely thinking that I'm doing it, and I hope to figure it out.
As you go. Wish you all the best as you figure it out.
Thank you.
TK, somebody asked, begged me to ask you these two questions. First of all, most of your films, all ones I've seen, will have Yoruba traditional elements, either silently, muted in it, or outright, trying to educate people on their Yoruba culture. And secondly, who writes your script? What are the basis for choosing scripts you use in making your movies? Two questions.
Oh, yes. First of all, the films are stories, and I'm taking inspiration from that cultural heritage, because what I discovered when I was growing up, I discovered the Yoruba literature, and there were those 5 books by Dio Fagunwa, Igbolodumare, these are the books, the literature that actually inspired me. And again, in the community, there have been a lot of stories. So what I'm saying, what I know is that Africa has millions of stories, and all I wanted to do is just use this medium of cinema to tell the story and to bring it to consciousness. So it is not really a language matter. It's a question of indigenous cultural expression. So I take it, take and ask, for instance, I want more from adaptation from literature as much as anybody else in Africa. And I can see this trend continuing because Africa has such a fantastic library, of books that can be adapted to, cinema. So this is primarily what I do, as recognizing, of course, that there are indigenous cinemas, as Japanese films, for instance, for Japan, among Japanese-speaking people, and then Chinese films. These are all great indigenous, cultural expressions. And so Yoruba, which is my own primary culture. I've adopted because it is within my cultural experience. My inspiration comes from that culture. So that is my approach to cinema, because it has to do with the cultural element and then, of course, combination of literature and fiction. And as to, I don't write script myself because I don't believe that I have the temperament. I'm a mood person. I might feel like writing and I might turn off. So I prefer to leave the writing to people who make a living by writing. And I have developed a relationship with writers and, in fact, with all other component arts. And so I have always commissioned the screenplay either from an adaptation of a literary material or an idea altogether. I select a writer who I feel will be best, for that particular project. And I have collaborated, for instance, with Professor Kimishola. And, in my experience with writers, the different. Professor Kimishola, started writing screenplay because I almost insisted that he wrote one, and because I had worked with Bruce Beresford, who directed Driving Miss Daisy and Mr. Johnson, I gave him the sample of the script, that we used, and I added other material and said, look, you can use this as a template. And that's how we started to work together. And Akim Ishola writes in the long hand, so if he writes about 150 pages material, I would have to type it all by myself. And this gives me the opportunity to read it, to get used to the material, maybe write an additional scene or something like that. But I do not take credit for any of this writing. I just leave the credit to the writers. I've worked with Wale Ogunyemi when he was alive, and I've worked with Nigi Akoni, and I have worked with Ade Adeniji, and I've worked with Tunde Babalola, and currently I'm working, with Adeshola Anke, who is based in London. But what I can say is my relationship with writers, I think it's been successful, especially the adaptations, because having adapted the literary material, it's interesting to know that we are still on speaking terms. We may disagree, but then I would always find a common ground. And I think my collaboration with writers has paid off, and by now, I don't see writing, by myself, but I think that collaboration will still continue.
Wow. So you've answered our question in one nutshell. Ebere wants to ask you a question. Ebere, why don't you go ahead? He wants to ask Tunde a question. No, your volume. Check your laptop. The settings.
It's on now.
Great.
Yeah, it's on now. Good afternoon, sir. Please,
Yes.
I would advise shooting for cinema for young and upcoming filmmakers. Would you advise us to shoot for cinemas, which is more lucrative?
Well, there's nothing wrong in shooting for cinema, but I think you need some preparation. I didn't start making film for cinema right out just like that. I had the benefit of, I worked in television, and I worked in many departments, and I was gaining experience, and I worked on other people's projects. I worked on big projects, and I was fortunate to have worked with one or two Hollywood crew coming to Nigeria. And this prepared me, before I started to make film for the cinema. In other words, I worked 10 years in television, and then I added maybe another 5 years, working as an independent producer and working on other people's projects before I started to make film for the cinema. In other words, you start out gradually and get skilled. And maybe you start with producing short films, and then maybe television series, and while you are in preparation to getting your first break and the opportunity, to tackle really full-length feature films.
Yeah. I agree with that. I want to ask a question. First of all, I have three titans, as my colleague has been chatting with me here online. And incidentally, the three of you, that's Franklin, Kunle, and TK, you guys were involved with our short film competition. Well, Franklin and TK as judges, and Kunle was our able collaborator, who, by the way, is hungry. So, so I want to ask you people one question. You went through some of the movie clips, you know. By the way, one of them is here, Fortune. So he doesn't know what's moving or not. So, however, I want to ask, how did you find the movies, the quality of the movies? Franklin, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Should I jump in on that one?
Yeah, please.
I find that short films, really in any setting, whether it be a major film festival, or even this competition, they usually vary widely. I think because, it really, as most films do, they vary widely, both because the seriousness of the subject matter they treat, or the visual quality of the directing. But I was actually quite impressed with some of the work. So some of it was not great, I'll be honest, but others of it I was actually really pleasantly surprised by. I really enjoyed because the better they treat, or the visual quality of the directing.
We are having
I was actually
an echo.
I apologize for that. Is it clear now?
Yeah, it's cleared out.
I'm impressed with the work.
So I want to. That's your view on it. You're taking. Somebody has their somebody has their laptop on. Could you please just mute it a bit till you want to say something? Because that's why we're having the echo.
Oh.
All right. So great. TK, your takes on the movies, the ones you've seen so far.
Well, I just find they were quite diverse, for me. And the idea of Afrinolly, I didn't know what to expect, because the Nolly had suggested some kind of geographical, area. And then Afri, the concept of using Nollywood to describe something that Afri is a combination that, for me, was different. And what I found out is that some of the things defied geographical boundaries, that is, went beyond Africa itself. And some of them, I could say, would have been something like Afrinolly Holy, kind of interesting, sort of, diverse, because some of the films were good enough to be called Hollywood films, and of course, I know that there was an attempt to localize that and take it out of that concept into what Afrinolly may mean or what it could mean. But it was very interesting because, of course, there were some that were very sleek, that are almost like Hollywood. But then there are some that were here, sort of African stories, but were not as sleek. But even then, they had something to offer. So if you talk about the story and you talk about the clarity of message, maybe those one had points, and then you talk about technical expertise, in terms of sound, then of course they sort of balance out. Yeah. And I think it's really very interesting and sometimes very difficult for me as a filmmaker to make such a judgment and to decide. Unfortunately, I have to decide that 10 movies of my preference. But even then, I'm particularly happy that the concept of a film, sort of a festival or taking place, not in the usual prearranged room at a particular time, but across, space. It's something that I find very interesting. And I say kudos, for putting this kind of thing together and making it happen. So for me, I think it's a unique experience.
Thank you so much. In life. So great. Oh, I'm so sorry, first of all. Apologies to everybody. So we're just going to pick up from right where we left off. Bongi, you were about to tell us about your experience, being a judge on Afrinolly. That's the quality of the movies, few of the movies you'd gone to.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I'll repeat myself because I think I wrote you a very passionate email to say how amazing it was an experience for me, because I don't know, I suppose I had a certain idea in mind of what to expect, and I was completely pleasantly surprised. Firstly, by the quality, the production value was just up to international standard, if I may put it that way. Also, the stories, the stories that were being told were just so amazing. It kind of gave me a sense that we're moving into a space where we're telling African narratives that are so rooted in where Africa is today, and not in the past or kind of dwelling in all that, which I'm quite passionate about that, because I think that our stories need to reflect Africa now, today. It's our challenges, our passions, our successes, our worries, if I may use that word. So I was really, really impressed. And it was also nice to see some works of people that I know, people that I suppose I used to work with, and I'm thinking, wow, they're making films. It's lovely to see people discover their talent and their passion. So it was really, really an amazing experience. And thank you again for having included me in the process.
Yeah, as well.
Honestly, it was a great honor for us to have you guys, because you guys are like our titans. You kind of make us look larger than life, really, which is good. Franklin, I want to ask you a question. Blacklist.
Yeah.
You started way back with Leonardo DiCaprio, right?
Yeah, well, it was when I was working for him. I mean, he wasn't really affiliated with it, but yeah.
Yeah, I know. But how did you pick movies? How do you pick movies that, is that something you watch out for? Is there something, you see a movie and you say, oh, I think this will be good, and you put it, what actually for you is that, I don't know how to put it.
No, it's what makes me want to make a movie or pass it along to somebody else or do something with it, basically. My job when I was working for production companies or Universal Pictures, my job was basically to read everything I got my hands on, and then the good stuff hand it to somebody who was my superior and say, we should make this. I mean, and this is going to sound very simplistic, but on some level, it makes me want to keep reading. The vast majority of screenplays that I had to read, I didn't. It took a lot of effort to finish. Yeah. But there are some where you read and you're flipping pages as fast as you possibly can because you care about the people. You want to know what happens. You want to know how the story resolves. And you feel, no matter how elevated or adult the material, you feel like a kid again when your father's telling you a story. And what happens next? What happens next? What happens to this person? What happens to this person? And I think when that moment happens, and I usually recognize it as a moment when I'm reading where I am completely enraptured by the storyteller, and I'm just going wherever they want to take me. That's usually the first indication that I have that there's something worth continuing with. And I think that's true for movies. I think that's true of novels. I think that's true of great journalism. I think that's true of great, oral storytellers. And that's, I think it's one of the things that, frankly, a lot of Hollywood films don't have. Yeah. They may have a lot of action, they may have a lot of explosions, but you don't care about the people that are involved, and you don't care to know what happens next. You're just sort of waiting to the next well-edited action sequence. And those are movies that when you leave the theater, you always wonder why you just paid your money to see them.
I know.
Yeah, so true, yeah.
I'm not. Another thing I wanted to ask: have you been pleasantly surprised or disappointed about a script you felt was awesome and nobody has picked it to make a movie off of it? Have you ever had that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there were. I mean, one of my favorite examples when the King's Speech, when that script first started circulating in Hollywood. It was sort of radioactive. No one wanted to make the movie about the stuttering prince who had to give a speech. And on some level, I understand why that was the case. I mean, on its face, it did not seem like the kind of movie that you could make successfully and make money and expect anyone to do anything but laugh at you for having made it. Yeah, there definitely are a few scripts. I'm trying to think of some. There's one, and I'm somewhat biased because it was written by a close friend of mine from university. But it's a biopic about Jackie Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's wife, and it's not a sort of cradle to grave biopic. It begins with the assassination, and it ends with the funeral. So it just follows 4 days in this young woman's life as she's dealing with, her now dead husband, who's, the president of the United States, her children, and trying to, protect them from the spotlight and the reality that their father's just been, killed by an assassin's bullet, and also dealing with all of the sort of most powerful people in the world trying to co-opt the image of her husband and her family for their own purposes. And I think it's easy to forget. I mean, I didn't realize this at the time, but Jackie Kennedy was, I think, 34 when JFK was killed. I mean, this was a young woman dealing with a lot of these issues and it's just a very well-written script. So I think that's probably, if there's one film that I would really like to see get made, it's that one. But there are lots, unfortunately. And most of them are a little bit more difficult to figure out how to market and sell to an American audience for whatever reason.
Franklin, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Are you seeing any specific trends in terms of scripts that are more marketable? I mean, with the Oscars now, you're seeing a lot of stories based on biographies and of famous people and historical moments and remakes of stuff like Les Mis. Is that what audiences in America are looking for right now, or the buyers, or I'm just
look,
the trends.
It's a great question. I mean, I think the reality is that, there's some economic realities in the industry right now. One is that domestic box office is not growing at all. It's not declining significantly, but it's essentially flat. There's definitely the non-American market is growing slowly, and particularly in markets like China and Russia, Brazil, but worldwide it's growing. So I think there's an increase in films that can be sold all around the world as opposed to just in the U.S. or just in one territory. I think that, and also because, and also the DVD market, the sort of post-theatrical revenue is disappearing in large part because of no one's really buying DVDs in the U.S. anymore because we can download the material, and also piracy, obviously. And the consequence of that, I think, is that the financiers, the studios, are much less likely to take massive financial risks on unfamiliar material. And the way you see that manifested in terms of the movies they make is that they're making remakes of things that you're already familiar with, and they're trying to tell the story in a new way. Or they're taking people that you already know and trying to tell the stories of those moments, or associate moments that you may be vaguely familiar with and dramatizing those.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
You'll continue to see, I'll guarantee you for the next 5 years, you'll continue to see sort of American and European fairy tales adapted into big budget action movies. So Little Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel, the list goes on and on. Jack and the Beanstalk was this weekend. They just DreamWorks just bought a reimagining of Robin Hood. So and I think that trend will continue. having worked at a studio, it's hard to imagine that trend stopping, actually.
Wow.
And
So
is
you're
there
traveling.
space? Sorry, is there space? I mean, in terms of African cinema transcending borders, are there any? Do you have any predictions or any thoughts around that?
I believe
Especially,
that. No, go ahead.
sorry,
Sorry.
especially in the stories that we telling or need to be telling.
I believe it will. I mean, look, I might be just idealistic, but I actually believe that there are, and I was really interested in what you said about contemporary African stories, because I think that there are realities facing people in Africa throughout the continent, but specific to various cities and various regions that are inherently dramatic, and inherently include, unfortunately, a lot of the elements that international audiences respond to as entertainment. And I think if you can find a way to tell those stories in a way that is dramatic and get great performances and have it look like a film that people are familiar with seeing in their own local cinema, I absolutely think it's possible. I've never, one of the real, and this is quite sad, but one of the reasons why you don't see more black faces in movies is that there is the belief that you can't market films with black faces around the world. Which is obviously wrong. It's just patently incorrect, and there's no basis for that conclusion, but it's an accepted conventional wisdom in Hollywood. I think more and more we're seeing that that's just not true anymore. And I think the more and more that statement gets validated, the more likely it is that we're going to see films that deal with Africa directly that end up being successful. I mean, City of God, for example, I think is the kind of film that if you made that an African version of that, it would be very successful worldwide.
Yeah, that's classic.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly.
Thank you so much, Franklin. I wanted to ask Tunde Kelani a question. I wanted him to answer the same question you answered, concerning being pleasantly surprised on movies you've made, movies you didn't expect to be accepted by the public. Maybe you just experiment, you just felt, okay, let's put it out there, and then, it becomes something great, and then something you really put in money into, and then it's not gathering the same critical acclaim as.
No, I agree that most of the time I've experimented. In fact, my whole career has been based on experiments because the technology and the technique of making films, they change all the time. So every time I realize I have new tools, I have now choices. I have more tools than ever before to express. So each film for me is an experiment. But I just don't make films for that sake. I make films that I believe that have been received by the audience, and I've been right. Making films for close to almost 20 years now, there has been some kind of progression, because every time there's a recognition for the next one. Each one is a progression on the next one. And so I believe that I have a base, primary audience base at home, but gradually these films are crossing borders. They are being received. A few years ago, when Nollywood, became really popular,
Absolutely.
and the Nigerian films were hardly invited to festivals. And when they started, was from the point of curiosity. It's not uncommon, to be in a festival and find only 3 people sitting watching your films. But these have changed. The films, the hall is always full, and this shows that there is an acceptancy in our movies. So movies I make subsequently now, I expect, in fact, they're expected. So more and more there's an acceptance, and I believe that with events happening, unfolding in Africa today, for instance, in 2015, Nigeria, has to comply by the international, broadcast regulation that we digitalize you know, the whole process of the broadcast medium. And this is going to demand content. And with it, there's going to be a demand for quality and standard, and it's beginning to happen. You know, so specifically, I think that there's going to be demand for content films, Nigerian films, African films, you know, because there are going to be platforms that are insatiable, that will consume all these new films, and I do believe that our films will be more acceptable.
Outside. Fingers crossed. Franklin, I need to ask you this question. Do you think that there would be a time where we could have a genre for African music movies at the Oscars?
I mean, I'll be honest, I'm less interested in having a category for African movies than I am in African filmmakers winning an Oscar. I don't think there needs to be a special category. I'd rather have an African filmmaker win Best Picture or Best Director.
Oh, that would be
And I don't see any reason why that's not possible.
Yeah.
No, really, I have been hoping and praying that that would happen. It would be something, wouldn't it?
It would be. I mean, I think we're certainly both, just as a matter of how time progresses, but I think also the way infrastructure develops, we're closer now than we've ever been. But I think it takes, you know, a community of filmmakers that continue to make films, and I think that because the tools to make those films are more accessible now than they've ever been, and the tools to distribute those films are more accessible now than they've ever been, I think it's really only a matter of time. Yeah.
I can't wait to see that.
But yeah, no, I'm like for that reason, I don't want to see a separate category. I would prefer to see African filmmakers making films that Hollywood recognizes as being just the best. Period.
Yeah, TK wants to
And if I can, yes, I wanted to say, you know, that I particularly don't like the idea of lowering the bar, you know, because
by giving us a different category.
No, I don't believe that. And frankly speaking, I don't think that the objective of a filmmaker should just be, I want to win an Oscar. You know, I think that you have to find that story, find the element which you want to connect with people, and it doesn't matter. You know, sooner or later, if Oscar comes along the way, well, that will be welcome. But I think the responsibilities of a filmmaker, you know, it's directed at his audience and to look for the soul of the particular story and not just want to win an Oscar.
Well said.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying that I agree.
Yeah, me too. I think it doesn't. I mean, we've kind of at a stage. I think with what we're doing now, it's possible that we can compete on the same level.
I agree.
Yeah.
But what I want to ask is a general question. What do you think of the African script writing, like particularly in Nigeria? TK, you probably would have a say in this one. Yeah. Nigerian script writing. I mean, Nollywood script writing.
I think, you know, there's a shortage of professional writers. I think young people should take it seriously. You know, the new technology makes it look so simple. Everybody thinks they can make a film, you know, and everybody thinks, you know, people tell you that they have 40 stories they've written, they have 50 screenplays, you know, and they think, you know, people have to really work hard nowadays. And unfortunately, I know for sure there's a shortage of good writers. So I think that within the next few years, we really have to develop writers, and writers have to continuously develop their writing skills. You know, and people tell you all sorts of stories. People say they have been writing from their mother's wombs, you know, and things like that. You know, it doesn't work out like that in real life because, you know, the story, the writing itself is so important to the whole process. It's the first point of contact, and that is the soul of the filmmaking, the primary task, you know, and, you know, so we have to continue to encourage, you know, people to, but there's nothing wrong in having, you know, writing as a hobby, but then to make a living from it, I think everybody should develop themselves. You know, I think they should take this seriously.
I want to ask a question. Second question. This has bothered me a couple of times. I'm wondering, is there a particular way to which your script should be written to that helps you have that or that creates that inroad into acceptance internationally? Is there a particular Hollywood way of writing scripts, or I don't know, because some films get premiere, do well outside, others don't. So I'm wondering, what is it? What is that thing? I don't know.
I mean, do you mean the script formatting, like on the page, or do you mean just a sort of
to play out? Yeah. What is that format? What is that format that, aside from knowing it's going to do well, what is that format that you need to,
I mean, on some level, it's a story. It's a story with a beginning, middle, and end. It typically has one main character and a coterie of secondary characters. It's typically some sort of initial incident that begins the plot, rising action. I mean, there is certainly a Hollywood formula. There's first 5 pages, something happens that begins the story. Page 30 approximately, the story gets significantly more complicated. You have rising action throughout the second act. Page 90, something else happens, and then you wrap up the script in the next 20 to 30 pages. Robert McKee has devoted his life to sort of breaking down exactly that formula.
Wow.
Essentially, what that means is story should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in all probability, you have rising action and rising capital D drama throughout that is resolved in a way that is somehow emotionally satisfactorily at the end.
Is that the same as like a major turning point in a rising action? Similar to that, hey?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's again. I personally don't believe the rules of storytelling have changed all that much in thousands of years. There's the Joseph Campbell sort of hero's journey. Person leaves their home, they encounter obstacles, they overcome the obstacles, they learn from overcoming the obstacles, eventually they return home a changed person. That is the basic story of most stories. And certainly the basics of most movies that are successful in Hollywood. And then the specifics is really how you choose to do it. And look, and you can complicate that in many ways. Memento tells the story backwards, but the emotional story is always some version of that, I think. Yeah.
I tell you, the experience that we're having here in South Africa is kind of echoing a little bit of what Tunde was saying about crisis in the lack of, I suppose, professional scriptwriters. So what you get is a whole lot of these government bodies and broadcasters investing in experts coming from other parts of the world, people like Robert McKee, who had a 5-day class that was very expensive, but we all kind of flocked in because he's kind of the master.
They flock in the U.S. too to his. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I mean it was very, very interesting. He's an interesting man himself because we weren't even allowed to speak or ask questions in his class. But then you have people like Albie James. I think he's kind of got a BBC background who came, and so. For instance, my experience now with my feature film is that it went through a whole, the development process has been so long, frustrating to the least, but also quite interesting in the sense that, it's an adaptation first of all. So you're taking a literary work and putting it into a visual thing. But I just wonder whether sometimes it's to be held prisoner to all these rules and formats, and often it can get very you just kind of takes forever. And I'm talking here from my own experience. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't take it away. But look, I do think that there is a way, like exactly how you've described it, a story that has got a beginning, middle, and end. Incredibly interesting characters. We told that we need to do like a character Bible first before you kind of filter it into dialogue or beats and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, I think there is, but at the same time, I just wish we, you know, sometimes we wouldn't be held so captive, like prisoner to all these rules.
Well, look, I mean,
Yes, I know.
TK, go ahead.
Climax here. Yeah.
No, of course, I know what Bongiwe is trying to say. It's good to know, you know, all those structure, 3-act structure, and know how to format the script, you know, all that. But there's an element, you know, that I find very exciting here in Nigeria, and that is the filmmaking is a bit more liberal and a bit more spontaneous. See, there's sometimes when you respond to the demand of the story right on the set, and then this is time when people put aside the script, you know, and then interpret it, and then you can connect with the script later. I find that sometimes very useful because it's drawing from traditional storytelling elements as well, you know. But again, I think, you know, a few years ago, there's been a lot of attempts to bring writers together. People who think they're writers together. I remember when Benzulu was alive, and he does this script doctor that he does. He comes in, and at once there are 40 people, you know, in the room saying, yes, I want to go through this course, I want to be writers. And Ben sometimes tells me that at the end of this exercise, we'll be lucky we found 4 people, you know, because gradually people drop aside, you know, for one reason or the other. They're not going to continue. They're not going to be writers. But occasionally we come across, we're lucky to have 3 people. But more importantly, I think that within the structure, within the established structure, sometimes it's important for the storyteller to take advantage, you know, of spontaneity, you know, in approaching, and rather than sort of a classic way, you know, of writing scripts.
Yeah.
I think there's another thing too, which is there is sort of 2 parts to what you were saying. I think there's the effectiveness of the story itself, and I think that like the story can get lost in this sort of insane process of multiple drafts and notes, and that I think that happens really anywhere where you have a great deal of money at stake. Lord knows it happens in Hollywood, particularly on bigger budget movies. You know, the studios will pay for 30 drafts of a script from different writers, trying to get exactly what they're looking for. But I think there's a separate issue, which is your individual process of how you put together the script, and I always sort of resist the idea that anybody has to take any specific steps in terms of preparing to write their own material. So all that matters is the end product. So whatever you have to do to get there, do what you have to do to get there. If that's sitting there, I have a friend who's a writer who will not do character bios, he will not do anything. He will sit at his laptop and he will write a screenplay, and that first draft is often 300 pages long. He just writes literally he calls it his vomit draft, and he just writes everything. And then he prints it out and binds it. He gets it bound by his agency, so it looks very nice, and it's huge. And then he has multiple copies of it, and then he'll read it once, and then he'll read it again, and just start cutting. And it's almost like being a sculptor. You have this giant piece of sort of a medium to work with, and you're just chipping away until you find what the actual piece of art is inside it. So I don't think there's a single script doctor out there that would recommend that approach, but it works for him, and he ends up delivering a very good script. And that's really all that matters, is whatever works for you.
Yeah, that's true.
But what I would say, and this is sort of the corollary to that, you know, in order to sort of break the rules, you have to know the rules first. Like the great painters all can paint representationally but then they decide they're not interested in painting representationally, that they can express truth better by doing something abstract, and they paint abstract. But they don't. But oftentimes their abstract work is better because they know why the representational work works. And they can bring those emotional truths into their abstract work and those techniques into their abstract work in one way or another.
Ask a question. The younger generation, what are the plans? Tunde, you are specialized in telling stories the African way. So what is your plan to pass on that genre so it doesn't just, go off?
No, it won't. I can assure you, it's not going to go off.
Yeah, Kule has taken
Yesterday,
it up, I know, but you still have your flair. There's still that. Kule's is Uyubonized, sorry for that. But yours is still, look at mommy. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So what are your plans to make sure that a certain, the lower generation, the up and coming generation still who want that, still have that, ability to tell the story unadulterated?
yes, at the moment, I think they're just distracted, and I encourage young people to read. They have to read. Most of the stories that I treat are in literature. They're in books that I've read, but they are not reading anymore. And the idea is to catch them young, because yesterday I was for instance, in Chekwandegbamin Sports Academy, and I was introducing photography, to secondary school students. And it's a shame, because at that age, when I started out in photography, they have not even come in contact with the camera or taken a single photograph. So the idea is to introduce all these artistic components to them as part of their education, in preparing them, So the idea is you have to read a lot more. They have to take to the skills in photography, and so on, and continue to practice. Because if we're not careful, they are going to be distracted by all the Facebook or Twitter or any of the things, and they're going off the road. So the thing is to keep their heads together, in a way. And for instance, I decided that I'm going to interact more, with young people. And Kule Afolayan is a success story, but don't let Kule Afolayan fool you. He knows what he's doing. Kule can make a turnaround anytime because he has now a lot of experience. And as such, people like Kule Afolayan himself, they should be giving back from now. They're closer to that generation, and I think it's in an ongoing, work in progress. We all have to be involved in this. And as a matter of fact, your own program too, it's something that can keep all these elements together.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Franklin, your turn.
Okay.
Younger generation. Are you going to start a blog? School or something, because somebody has to learn this thing you know how to do, that uncanny ability to see good scripts. So
I don't worry about the younger generation as much. I think for a few reasons. One is that I would like to consider myself still part of it.
That's good.
The second is increasingly I'm realizing that I'm not. Every time I go out and try to play soccer, I realize that I'm no longer part of that generation. But I think that I think what's interesting about the sort of generation that's following is that they're constantly exposed to content, to video content, and in many ways they've been directing in some form or another their entire lives. I mean, I have a 4-year-old niece, my younger brother's daughter, and she knows how to use my iPhone to take video already.
Okay.
So in many ways, she's been using a camera since near birth. Now the question is, how do you transition someone that's sort of been chronicling their life and tweeting about it and posting it on Facebook, and give them a formal education in film and form and structure, But I think that they're familiar with the tools at a far earlier age than I think any of us probably were, and I think they're familiar with, and they bring a very critical eye as well. Like when I had interns when I was working at Universal, the kids that were 17, 18 years old, they all have very clear opinions on what they think is good and bad, and they're surprisingly able to articulate those opinions very well. So I think if you can combine that with the experience with the tools, and then provide some sort of real education, and frankly, it's people like us, it's mentors like TK, that we should be able to find these filmmakers who I think we're going to. I genuinely believe we're going to see remarkable stories told from this generation, and their use of technology is going to be extraordinary. And I'm frankly sort of excited to see what happens. I think we're going to lose some stuff generationally? Yes, but I think that's always been true. Yeah. But I actually think there's a good chance that the next generation is going to use the tools that weren't even at our disposal to tell stories that are part of our lives that are going to be remarkable. I tend to be optimistic, but I think there are real reasons for that optimism in this case.
I know. Fortune has a question for you. Okay. Sorry, Fortune, I think you better ask your question now.
Okay, I'll be fast with it. My name is Fortune Onyedikachi Enyendu. I start by saying I'm a Nigerian living in Cape Town, and always say that my short film titled Jason's Hope is in the finals of the Afrinolly short film competition. Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I have a question as regarding mentorship. I'm in my 20s, and to be very frank with you, I refer to Tunde Kelani as Papa TK because this is the closest I've gotten to him. I've always wanted to come close to Papa TK and Franklin Leonard because as young people we need to fill in the gap. Obviously, most of us, we don't have backgrounds. Our parents were not movie makers, script writers, and all that stuff. And we require mentorship from people like you. And she asked the question as regards a blog or something like that. How do we tend to follow you guys and retain originality? Because as young people, as I said, sometimes we tend not to get too focused. And we get sidetracked. How do we hold on to you guys so we can retain that same originality of our fathers and push it on, and hopefully pass it on to the kids in their 5 and 10-year-olds, so that we don't lose? Because right now we are like the guys the guys in the middle, in between. Please, how do we get in touch? How do we get mentorship? How do we get first?
Did we lose him?
Yeah, I think it's happening. So, who wants to answer the question first? TK?
No, could you repeat the question though? Because I had a hard time hearing it. It was coming in and out.
Okay, let me repeat the question. The question is mentorship. Well, it's close to what I just asked you, but he's talking in terms of mentorship, blogs or some sort of, something they can read or look up to, in order to pace themselves, to get to where they need to get to.
Got it.
I think he's rather fortunate, because starting out, look at where he's gotten. He has a short film to his credit, and that's not all. They have the advantage of technology, because when we started to make a film, you have to, it's almost impossible for you to just start out like that and make a film. But the advancement in the new technology, has placed that tools almost in your laps, and then it's up to you what you make of it. In those times, I worked on people's projects. I worked with almost all Ogunde films, and in which case we didn't get paid. You didn't want to get paid, and you slept. Anywhere. If you had to sleep in the open, you sleep in the open, as long as you have, the experience, to just see how things are made. But the new technology has made it easier. For instance, on my new project, the Dazzling Mirage, I've started out some kind of report, which is now in episode 2, taking everybody along on the actual process of how this thing is going to be realized. You know, from the idea to the material, the adaptation to the story, and the process. You know, so all he has to do, everybody, all they have to do is to log on to our YouTube, Tunde Kelani YouTube channel, and you can regularly see the updates, and it will be clear when we start filming that you could actually join us if you want to, you know, to see how we work, you know, and then observe at a first glance, you know, to just, you know, in preparation for your journey to becoming filmmaker. I think that the opportunities now are better than in our own days.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, that's great. Frankly?
No, I completely agree. I think one can get, you don't have the hands-on opportunities that you might at film school, but all of the lecture opportunities, YouTube alone, you can get a better education than a lot of film students get in classrooms, certainly all across the United States. I mean, you can just go on YouTube and search for Martin Scorsese, or, I mean, literally every filmmaker. There's video of every filmmaker that you probably admire talking about their craft and how they approach their craft. And that can be a phenomenal education. On the Blacklist website, we have a blogger named Scott Myers, who's a professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, who I mean, I don't even understand how he has enough time with 3 kids and a job to generate the content that he generates. But if you just go to our education link there, there's remarkable resources on script writing. And he includes a lot of links to videos from all across the web. So, you know, the ideal scenario, obviously, is that you find someone that takes you under their wing and treats you like their own child. But you can find there's so much information, I mean, about everything available on the internet. But I think especially about this kind of stuff. And I'd say, you know, take full advantage of that, because if you're consuming all of it and processing it and it informs your own work, your work will be significantly improved.
I agree. Totally. It's true. There's this thing going on with the younger generation. But I want to start that question by asking the both of you, or everybody here, including Bongi, how did education, having a good educational background, help in propelling you to where you are now? Because a couple of people feel they don't need to go to school, as in real school. So I really would want you guys to please talk to them on that, because they need to hear it from you guys. They want to be like you guys, but they're not willing to go the route you guys went. So Franklin, let's start with you. What's your take?
I think there's a few things. You know, look, I certainly would not be where I am if I hadn't, you know, completed college. But more importantly, because look, there are people far more successful than I am that did not go to college.
I know.
But I do think, you know, I'm here in San Francisco right now. Everyone talks about Facebook. Facebook was started by a college dropout. Microsoft was started by a college dropout. But I think that the thing that is important, and there are a lot of people that are like, I don't need to go to school. I don't need to learn a craft in order to do the craft. And TK talked about that earlier. There is still an education that one needs to participate in to accomplish anything of value. And so for me, you know, what I got from my education actually had very little to do with necessarily what I'm doing right now, but, you know, reading the great literature, the Western canon, is an introduction to the drama that I'm trying to replicate in movies. And if I hadn't read the great books and sort of, you know, mythology and Shakespeare, it would be harder for me to recognize a good script when I see it, because I wouldn't be able to understand the basics of how dramatic structure exists if I hadn't read Aristotle. I think that's very important. But again, I think it's more about an education and devoting yourself to learning a craft and a skill better than anyone else. You know, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and all these people that left school did so to focus full-time, all the time, every day, on doing something specific. And it's not just as simple as, I don't need to go to school, I'm going to go start directing movies. You should maybe learn how to do that and sort of the history of where that comes from before you jump in and say, I'm going to direct movies.
Well said.
I'm curious about your thoughts on this too, because I think it's probably more relevant for actual filmmakers rather than the people that are sort of paying for films to be made.
I agree. TK, please share.
I've always insisted, especially for young people, to absolutely, I don't talk to people who don't go to school, because education is so important. For example, I didn't go to university. I just started to learn photography after secondary school. But of course, later I went to London Film School, and read all about the theory and aesthetics, of filmmaking. And I've always read, when I was very young, started with Yoruba literature, and then comparatively went to other literature. And that fueled my fantasies, my creative fantasies, Greek mythology, even the Bible is a source for great stories, from the institution of the monarchy to the fall of the Northern Kingdom. These are fantastic stories. So it's only with education that you can open your mind before you start to express, anything. When you make the movie, then that's not the end of the story, because sometimes I'm invited to forum or fora where suddenly I realize that I'm the only one who is not a university professor. And before we continue any kind, of discussion, I always tell them, listen, I'm not an intellectual, I'm not a theorist like you, so I'm odd man here, I'm just a filmmaker. But the ability of education is you don't know where it's going to propel you. So you need to prepare yourself. And that is why education is absolutely important. So I insist that young people must go to school. They must be educated before they... It's a combination of education and the skills. In fact, what I enjoy most about filmmaking is primarily it's an art, but it's a conference of art and science. It's an art that demands that you have some scientific knowledge, you need as the ingredient for you, which you can build, so your medium of expression. So education is absolutely important.
I agree. Totally.
Very well said.
Yeah. Bongi, do you have anything to add to that? Do you want to ask?
Oh, no, not really. I mean, I can only just about echo both Tunde and Franklin. I have a son who's 13, and he plays cricket. He's very good at it, actually. So every time you ask him what he's going to be when he grows up, he says, I don't have to do my homework because I'm going to be a cricket player. So, so for me, it's like, yes, I know that, there's a lot of people who've been successful sports people, but, I think education, whether you've got that talent, it augments something. There's something that it adds on to it. And I want to also repeat at our last hangout, just from a point of view of what we're talking about today, I think just to add on, it's not just about reading books and perfecting your craft, but that it also includes watching other people's films, knowing what other works are out there, even if the films are bad or good. But you can't say you're a filmmaker or a scriptwriter or whatever in this industry if you are not watching other people's films. It's the only way. I mean, I remember in one of Martin Scorsese's Oscar acceptance speech, he paid tribute to Osman Samban, which for me was like, wow, here's this guy that we think is so amazing, and he's paid tribute to our father of African cinema, and seeing and saying that what he's learned from his style of filmmaking. So, watching other people's films, you learn something, and you learn their mistakes, and you don't repeat it in your own films. I think that's also part of the education, is that you must watch Tunde's films. You must watch my film when it comes out. And many, you know what I mean? Like there's so much out there, and it's important that you know what is out there and why it's good, why it's bad, why is everyone talking about it, what can you learn from it, and all that. So yeah.
What I would add to that is every great filmmaker I've encountered in Hollywood, and even some of the not great ones, but every director that I've encountered in Hollywood is addicted to watching movies. I mean, it borders on a clinical addiction. Scorsese is a great example. He is watching movie constantly. My favorite example is Tarantino, who, you know, when he's not directing a movie, is watching 7-8 movies a day. When he finishes his movies, he will either find a screening room, or I think he probably has a screening room in his home now, and sit there morning, noon, and night and watch films. And it's extraordinary, but they all have encyclopedic knowledges of film. And I think, and again, they're consuming all of it, their brain is processing it, and then it's informing all of the work that they're doing. And it's yeah, I mean, I've never met a great director who does not love watching movies.
Yeah.
I guess that takes me out of being a director, right? I love it, but I can't do 7 and 8 a day. So.
I mean, look, seven or 8 movies a day is a lot. I know when I go to film festivals, I try to do 5, and I'm like, I stop processing at some point. But they're definitely, that is, you know, it's their one true love. It's why they do what they do. In the same way that, you know, my younger brother, and on the question of your son in cricket, my younger brother played professional football, soccer, for 7 years here in the U.S. And when he was a kid, he was like, I want to be a soccer player. And my mother was like, well, you're still going to school and you're still doing your homework.
That's what I say.
And now that his career, because you have to do something after the sport, because you can't play the sport until you're 70. And now he's in medical school. And he didn't know that he was going to be heading to medical school when he was, you know, playing football or before that. But you don't know where life will take you. And an education is a platform to doing anything.
Yes. It is.
Yeah.
So,
it's a good insurance policy, if nothing else.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
It's a nice way of putting it.
Okay, somebody wants to ask a question, Dolapo.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, not particularly a question, but just on the issue of education.
Okay.
I think the young generation coming up now will actually have a very big challenge. You know, because of technology.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much around that's happening. You know, that people can get very, very carried away.
Yeah.
You know, by what they have, the tools they have at their disposal. So I mean, that really you know, limits people to want to really learn in a formal environment. You know, they just want to try things out. Because I work in the creative sector as well, but digital media, and I can tell you that in web development, I mean in Nigeria, for example, a lot of people really don't want to learn the deep intricacies of it. You know, they just want to grab WordPress and just put templates together, use plugins. I mean, Instagram gives you high-end picture color correction. You know that you probably have to go and study for years to be able to do that. So I think the young people need to, really need to chill out, and let the technology be on one side, and really go into the foundation, to really take advantage of what the technology can do to us.
Thank you so much, Dolapo. At least the good part is that we are all in agreement. You've just got to go to some sort of school, to hone your craft, and
Yeah.
I think his point's really interesting, though. This idea that, there are all these tools that don't require you to have a deep education in the intricacies of the thing. I mean, like TK, you started it with 16 with film, and now you're working in digital. And I suspect that your ability with digital is informed by your experience with film.
Yeah.
But a lot of the next generation is gonna, like you said, you throw an Instagram filter on a photo, you think you're a great photographer. That doesn't make you a great photographer.
Absolutely.
It means that you took a photo and you can sort of fix it in post. My theory is that while yes, some members of that generation will sort of coast on the templates and the sort of turnkey solutions, there will be those for whom that is the introduction to other things, and they will go deeper and they will learn how to make the new Instagram. And in order to do that, they'll have to understand photography. At least that's my hope. And those people will end up, because they have access to these tools and the interest to go further, will end up producing material that is sort of truly remarkable. I mean, my favorite example of this is James Cameron, right? Like, James Cameron got his start, like his first film was Piranha 3D, I think. And you could say, well, this is a guy who like was making models and it was all special effects, but then he got obsessed with the special effects. And after Titanic said, I know what I want to do with my next movie, but the technology doesn't exist to make it. So I'm going to spend 15 years making the technology that will allow me to direct my next movie. And, you know, it was the biggest movie I've ever made. So I think it's a double-edged sword. I think it cuts both ways. On one hand, you're absolutely right. It is easy for that generation to get distracted. They're constantly on Twitter and Facebook. They can take great photos with Instagram with the stroke of a key. On the other hand, I think that will attract a new generation to explore deeper in that world, and hopefully they'll create amazing stuff.
Wow.
Again, I might just be naively optimistic, but I have great faith in the human spirit and human creativity to continue to elevate humanity as a whole.
Yeah, we all have to, because I mean.
Right, because if you don't, then it's a really unpleasant way to go through life.
Oh yeah. So we all have to do. And Tunde, Fortune wants to know how he can link up with you. He wants to be involved with your new shoot. So I'm going to ask him to go to your Google Plus page.
No, I think it's very easy. Go to mainframemovies.tv and then click on the YouTube. The new project is called The Dazzling Mirage. It's an adaptation of Yinka Ibukare's novel. It's a love story, but there's a theme of sickle cell disease. You know, so you can. This is the time to get involved in the project. And I said, you know, let's all make this film together, because as a matter of fact, I want to throw it open, you know, so young people can benefit, you know, from this experience. So just go to YouTube channel, find Tunde Kelani and the film Dazzling Mirage, and you can just continue, just follow and be part of it.
So TK, is this what we are to watch out for 2013, or is there more?
No, there's more. You know, there's a queue. As a matter of fact, of movies I want to make this year. You know, because the language of Dazzling Mirage is going to be in English because of the theme of sickle cell, which is the black man disease, Africa, and diaspora. Then after that, I will do Wura Ola, which is an adaptation of Femi Oshobisan's novel, you know, to pacify the Yoruba audience. I have to do another Yoruba.
We're looking forward to that. At least we all know that you are the master of that genre, so it's all cool. Franklin, what are we looking at? Before you answer that, I just want to say that I might just shock you with a script that would just blow Hollywood apart. So
good. Hollywood needs to be blown apart. I mean, in a good way. You know, I'll be very honest. I don't know what's next for me right now, and it's I'm in a very odd point in my career, because obviously for the last 10 years I've worked at production companies and studios, and the goal was making movies. Now, the work that I'm doing is primarily about changing the way movies are made, and changing who's necessarily involved with them. And what considerations go into which movies get made, and how exactly that manifests itself. If I'm being honest, I don't know. And it's sort of a brand new, alternately terrifying and exhilarating adventure. but one that the early signs point to being very successful, so I'm hopeful. But I really don't. We could have this conversation again in 6 months, and I couldn't tell you exactly what I'll be doing.
Great. So I want to ask this last question. How has Hollywood received this new blacklist?
Yeah, the response has been very positive. I think that there was initially some skepticism. I think there was a fear that, oh, of course you do this thing and then you try to make money on it. Isn't that the way it goes? And I think that was in large part because there's a long history of people operating in this space who were doing it for far less than noble reasons. There's a long history of guys in Hollywood saying, send me a check for $1,000, I'll get your script to the right people, and that's that. And I think that, I've spent the last 4 months really focused on communicating to aspiring screenwriters and Hollywood exactly what we're doing, why and how, and being as transparent as possible about the process. And it's been very successful. I mean, the new site has been live for 4 months, where we're accepting scripts from writers from all over the world. There have been 3,100 screenplays uploaded to the site and evaluated.
Wow.
There have been 4,000 unique downloads by Hollywood film industry professionals of unrepresented material. So we're definitely getting exposure for the best of that work. And more excitingly, there have been 13 writers who are now represented by major agencies or management companies that were discovered via the site. So, and many of them do not live anywhere near Los Angeles. So there were 2 writers from my home state of Georgia who are now represented by Hollywood companies. There's a writer from the Midlands in England who's now represented by a major Hollywood agency. So I think slowly the industry is receptive to it. I think the real challenge for us is to make sure that we're finding really high quality material that the industry is interested in making. And as long as we do that, they'll thank us. But until we're doing that, until they know we're doing that, there's always going to be some amount of skepticism.
I know.
But we just keep doing the work, and eventually it'll work.
I know. Thank you so much, Franklin.
No, it is genuinely my pleasure.
It is great to have had you on.
It is difficult for me to wake up this early in the morning.
I know.
But this definitely makes it worth it. Like if I'm going to wake up for any reason at 5:30 in the morning, it's for conversations like this.
So that's
Thanks also from my side.
Yay for Afrinolly, and thank you, Franklin.
No, it's my pleasure.
So
I wanted to say also I'm so happy I joined today because I know I was meant to come on last week, but it was really nice to meet you, Franklin, and to listen to your thoughts. Very interesting. I'm going to be Googling you and finding out more about your work. And also, Tunde, it's lovely to see you. I hope to catch up next week and with you, Jane.
Honestly.
I look forward to meeting you all in person at some point very soon. South Africa holds a very special place in my heart. I was actually there for 3 months in 1999. And while I was writing for a travel guide, and went to the Grahamstown Arts Festival, and it was June to August of 1999, and while I was there, I was in a car accident that I walked away from without injury, and I think it's probably the reason why I decided not to go to law school and ended up pursuing this path. So there's a good chance that without my experience in South Africa, I would not be doing film at all, and there certainly would be no doubt. So,
well, I must invite you soon. You must come back soon. I'm going to find a way to bring you here soon.
I would love to. Cape Town is my favorite city. Literally, Cape Town is my favorite city in the world. So I would be happy.
I'm Zulu, so Durban, the KwaZulu-Natal coastline, is my favorite, and that's where we'll take.
And I spent a month in Durban when I was there. Durban's amazing.
Wonderful.
So yeah, please, by all means, if there's a way to figure out me doing something there, I'd love to.
Okay, fantastic. I'm gonna make a plan. Very exciting.
Sounds good.
Great.
Lagos is jealous. I have not yet been. I do not discriminate. I only say that about South Africa, Cape Town, and Durban because I've been there. I would be happy to come to Lagos as well. I mean, it's there's a lot of traveling for me to do, and I'm looking forward to doing it.
I'm glad you know that. I'm glad you know that. So, TK, I don't even know how to thank you for making.
No, it's a pleasure, and all I want to say is, Africa is blessed. We have our cultural heritage. We have those millions of books. More importantly, we have the technology. We're empowered to tell these stories ourselves. So let's go out there and make more movies.
Right on.
Thank you so much, guys. Of course, this is not the end of it. So we hope to hold on to you guys and keep bugging you. Oga TK, now there's no way. I'm always calling you guys. Like I say, once I have your number, it's just I can't let go. Franklin knows. I called him one day so early. I'm so much like that. So,
no, it's okay.
It's fine though. I welcome the call. These are good calls to get. Like I said, if I'm going to be up this early in the morning, it better be for a reason like this.
Thank you so much, man.
Y'all have a good day.
You too.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Fantastic, great. It's been great, Franklin, hanging out with you all. Thank you very much.
Bye.